Welcome everyone to the AltAccountant podcast. Today we have a special guest, Rich Horwath, who's the author of several books on strategy. But the latest book that caught my attention is called Strategy Man and the Anti-Strategy Squad. And it's pretty brilliant because it's actually a graphic novel configured to tell a story about how a business should think about strategy or should develop a strategy. But because there's sort of a good guys and bad guys, they're telling the story about how all these bad guys, quote unquote, are really the detractors of a good strategy. And we're going to deep dive into sort of some of the bad guys and the villains of the book, because they actually do tell the story of the importance of thinking strategy the right way. So with that, Rich, welcome to the show.
Hector, thanks very much. It's great to be with you today.
Absolutely. No, the pleasure's all mine. Let me ask you a question. You run a company called the Strategic Thinking Institute. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're trying to do there?
Yeah, so, Hector, about 19 years ago, I was working for a marketing firm and developing strategy plans. And it was interesting. At one of the breaks, we were doing a strategic planning offsite session. One of the managers came up to me and he said, "Hey, Rich, I just had my performance review. And my boss said that I'm too tactical. I need to be more strategic." He said, "How do I do that?" And so it was a great question. I said, "Well, let me do some research." And so I did a lot of research, Hector, and really about 20 years ago, most of the information on strategy was about company strategy. It wasn't really designed for the individual person. So day in and day out, how do you as a manager, as an accountant, how do you be strategic? And so that really that was kind of my aha moment. And so I started doing research and writing, and then about 17 years ago founded my company, really dedicated to helping the individual managers be more strategic so they can grow their business, create advantage, and be as successful as possible.
That's great. And you've written several books prior to this latest one, and they're mostly around strategy, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So mostly around strategy. And again, how do you take some very practical tools and techniques and tips and apply them to your everyday work? Because you know what, Hector, I see in a lot of companies, strategy tends to be like a birthday, where it happens once a year. There's a lot of excitement around it, but then it kind of goes into a PowerPoint deck or Excel spreadsheet, and we don't really use it the rest of the year. So a lot of my books are really designed to help people think about strategy more than once a year, to really apply it on a regular basis.
Absolutely. So let's dig right into the content from your older books, which I think are more the theoretical and practical framework for the newest book, which is this graphic novel that this is really what caught my attention. The reason why I invited you, because I would love to pick your brain about how you came up with it. But you have a white paper on your website called the Strategic Thinking Manifesto, which is actually it's about a 10-page document, and is sort of a summary of how businesses today look at strategy, and mostly what they fail at. Because one of the key things about strategy that I've learned over the years is, when you try to describe what strategy is, you can go up to so many tangents. Strategy could mean so many things. I think when you start describing strategy for what it's not, it starts really making a lot more sense. So let's dive deep into this paper, where you mention the top 10 issues or challenges that management has with coming up with a strategy or executing a strategy. So I'll mention a couple of them, and maybe we can dive into it. Let's talk about time. So I guess those are time constraints, not having time, not making time. Let's talk a little bit about that. Why is thinking about time strategically and how to allocate time to put into executing a good strategy?
Well, Hector, as you probably see out there, we live in a very action-oriented world. So most of us are kind of on this activity treadmill where we're just going and going, and we're cranking out work. And what I found is, I work with companies of all different sizes, is that one of the big challenges, as you mentioned, is that most people feel like, you know what, Rich, I don't have time to step back out of my day-to-day work and really kind of look at the business from a higher level. And so what happens is, we get caught in this to-do list mentality, and we're not actually stopping and asking ourselves, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And how could we maybe do it better or more efficiently? And what I found, Hector, is that the best managers are able to step back once in a while, maybe it's weekly or monthly or even quarterly, and really assess, What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And how can we do it better? And I think, if that's a lesson for everybody, including myself, is we need to step back out of the day-to-day work sometimes and really give ourselves some time to think about the business. What do we want to do short-term, long-term, and how can we do it?
And when you mention that specifically, I think about this graph, this basically drawing where it shows two cavemen dragging rocks around with square wheels, and then there's sort of a third caveman offering people the round wheel, and they're not even looking at the wheel shape. They're just saying, no thanks, don't offer me new things. We're way too busy. And meanwhile, they're basically dragging everything around, working against the current. Is that kind of the issue that we have where managers are just quote unquote too busy to just think about strategy?
Yeah, I love that graphic, Hector, that you showed. I think that encapsulates it perfectly. And what happens is, because we feel we're so busy, we're not able to really understand what's beneath the surface of the business. If we're going to really excel at what we do, we have to remember that the definition of excellence is deviation from the norm. Right? Excellence is deviation from the norm. So if we're doing the same normal things in the same normal ways that we've always done them, or that other accounting firms are doing them, then we're not going to excel. We're not going to be the best of the best. So part of that ability to excel or to deviate from the norm comes from stepping out of the day-to-day activities and say, how could we do things differently that are going to bring value to our clients? And that's really a key question.
Let me ask you for some practical advice / free consulting. That's the advantage of today's world with podcasts, right? You get to talk to people you otherwise wouldn't, right? If you're not engaging them in some sort of commercial transaction. But let's say, for example, I run an accounting firm and we have 8 people in my team. And most of my customers are probably small business owners, 1 or 2 owners, also with anywhere between 5 and 10 people on the team. How much time should I be thinking about allocating to strategy and all year long? And also, what does it look like to spend time on strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would recommend a two-pronged approach. Number one, you as the individual leader need to spend time by yourself thinking about the key ideas that are going to grow your business. How are my customers thinking and behaviors changing? What's my competitive landscape like? Am I able to differentiate myself? So number one, you as the individual leader have to carve out individual time for yourself. Number two, you have to carve out time with your team to think about the business and to invite them in to share their ideas on ways that you can grow, ways that you can differentiate. What types of trade-offs should we be making? Meaning, what are we going to do more of? What should we be doing less of so that we could be successful? And to your point, Hector, as a best practice, what I typically see is people spending about an hour or 2 a month as a team talking about strategy. So again, it can be over lunch on a Friday afternoon. It can be at the beginning of a staff meeting in the morning. But typically 1 to 2 hours a month is a good starting point for most groups to sit down and think about strategy. And then to your point, when you do sit down and think about strategy, I always think about 4 areas. And the 4 areas are the market. So what are the trends or patterns that we're seeing in our market? Is there consolidation? Are people, wanting greater convenience because of things like Amazon and Uber? And how do we bring more convenience to our customers? So number one, we want to think about the market. Number two, we want to think about our customers. So what's driving value for our customers today? What are some problems or challenges that our customers have that we could help them solve? And then the third area is around competition. So if we do a quick scan of our competitive environment, how are we different than the competition? If the only difference between us and our competitors is price, then that's what our customers are going to base their decisions on. So we need to figure that out. And then the fourth area to think about when you get together with your team about strategy is your company. And again, you can think about things like SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So what are we as a company really good at? What are we weak at? What are areas that we need to shore up or get better at? What are our weaknesses? Then what are our opportunities? What are the things that are positive in the environment that we should be trying to take advantage of to grow our business? And then what are the threats, the things that are potentially going to be harmful to our business that we need to try to neutralize? So again, individually, carve out some time for yourself as a leader, and then as a team, 1 to 2 hours a month, thinking about those 4 areas: market, customers, competitors, company, I think can set people up to be successful.
Oh, I love that. Thank you very much, Rich. And another key area or challenges that managers have, according to your white paper, is lack of insight. And one of the things I really like about, I think, all your writing in general is, one, to allude to what you spoke earlier, you make a pretty big deal that thinking it's a really valuable part of the organization. And as managers or accountants obsessed with efficiency, when we don't see people typing something, writing on something, making photocopies, when we don't see someone that looks busy, we automatically think, oh, they might be inefficient or they're being inefficient. And one of the things that you propose is, there's some value on just slowing things down, think about things for a little bit, and look for that insight. And I love the way you describe or the way you define insight. Can you talk to us about what's your definition of insight and why is it important?
Yeah, so, Hector, if you go back over the years, insight is really one of the key foundational concepts around strategy and innovation. Innovation is the ability to create new value for our customers, and strategy is really then how do we use our resources, our time, our talent, our people to bring and to deliver that value for folks. So, to your point, I like to keep things simple. And so for me, the simple definition of insight is a learning that leads to new value. So a learning that leads to new value. And what I'm seeing, Hector, is a best practice when I work with companies, especially tech companies, is that now people are trying to create accountability for insights. So let's say you have a performance review with your employees. It's not just about, okay, what are the things that you did this year, but also what did you learn this last quarter that brought new value to our company? And I think especially to your point, in small accounting firms, if you only rely on people's experience and you're not continually mining that experience for new learnings that bring value, then we're really missing a huge opportunity to deliver greater value to the clients that we serve. So one of the things I'd recommend is for everybody out there is every month or every quarter, have your employees jot down what were their top 3 insights, their top 3 learnings that they were able to use to bring new value to the firm or to the clients that the firm is serving. And I think if you start to do that, you start to build this huge momentum and it really snowballs. And now people are wanting to really contribute new ideas, because I think sometimes as a small business owner, we feel like we've got to have all the ideas, all the solutions, but the best small business owners are continually able to tap into their people's best ideas so that it's not one person, it's a group of people coming up with these insights, these ideas, and that really helps firms kind of get to that next level.
And one of the key insights that I draw from what you're saying is that I think that most of us, the leaders and the owners, believe that strategy stays at the top, should stay at the top, should always be top down. And in many ways, look, you started the business, you have the passion, you have the energy, you have the vision. I think it makes tons of sense for the strategy to come top down. The problem is that when strategy is only pushed like that and it's not sort of grown from within the talent in your organization, people don't see it as important or as valuable, and they see it as another task from the boss. Okay, another flavor of the month. Correct. So one of the in here in this top 10 challenges that you mentioned, one of them is training and tools, and I think that goes hand in hand with what you're saying is that are even the owners, the managers, or even the team members are lacking training or tools around how to develop strategy or how to execute strategy. Correct?
That's exactly right, Hector. And you bring up a really good point, too. Sometimes as a small business owner, we don't want to let go of the control of the strategy. And that's fine. But one of the things, to your point, is you want to bring your people in to help think about the strategy. So we're not asking the person that just started to come up with the strategy. That's going to be, again, the responsibility of the owner. However, if we're the owner and we're not getting input on the strategy from the people that work for us, then we might as well not have people working for us. I mean, we're basically a company of one at that point. So again, to your point, you want to tap into people's thinking, and a part of that is creating awareness. So, sit down with your people at lunch and like you said, give them a white paper, share with them what is strategy. Because once they understand what strategy is, then they can be more comfortable in contributing some ideas to it. Then the next month or next quarter, you might sit down with them and say, okay, we're going to do a SWOT analysis. We're going to say, so what do you as my team think our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, our threats are? So one of the things, to your point, Hector, you might want to do is each month or each quarter have kind of a lunch and learn where you bring up one topic like strategy or like a SWOT analysis, and you go through it with your people and get their ideas, get their thinking. And after a year, now if you've done it monthly, you've rolled out 12 new tools and trainings to help them be better. Because as a small business owner, we don't necessarily have all the resources to take people, out of their regular job for a week and send them to a training program. But if we can do it an hour a week or an hour a month over lunch, that's a huge win for us.
And I know that you make a big deal about staying away from jargon and big words and just words that look and sound sexy. And when we talk about the practical ways that we can bring our team together once a month to talk about strategy, I think even the word strategy by itself might just be a bit too broad. What ways do you think an accountant can consult on a small business owner how to think about strategy, or how a small business owner can sit down with their team and think about strategy without using big words or broad words like strategy? Like what kind of topics do you bring out to sort of extract that ideation from the group?
Yeah, Hector, I think you're right on point with this, because the reality is we need to think about strategy. We need any plan. So, if we run our small business, or if, let's say, we volunteer with our church group and we have a plan for our nonprofit, a good plan is always going to answer two questions. What are we trying to achieve? And then how are we going to do it? So think about your plan from two questions, what and how. The what are going to be your goals and objectives. So what are we trying to achieve? So let's use a real world example. The goal might be to reach the peak of a mountain. That's what I'm trying to achieve, to get to the top. The objective then is also going to be what you're trying to achieve. It just quantifies it. And as accountants, we love that. So it quantifies it, and then it puts a time frame on it. So in this case, if our goal is to get to the top of the mountain, the objective might be to climb 3,000 feet each day for 3 days till we get to that 9,000 foot summit. The strategy and tactics then answer the how question. How are we going to get to the top of that mountain? So the strategy is that general how. Can we go straight up to get to the top? Do we need to zigzag? Do we need to go around the other side? The general approach. And then the tactics are really the specific ways we're going to get to the top. So do we need ropes, pickaxes, hiking boots? Do we need a boat to go around the other side? What are those tangible things? So to your point, Hector, if we're going to keep it simple, I would always think about strategy two ways. What are we going to achieve, which are our goals and objectives, and then how are we going to do it, which are our strategies and tactics. And if you as a small business owner can answer those two questions and keep it simple for your people, then you can be sure that everybody's pulling in that same direction.
I remember from what you're telling me, I remember I used to work in retail. I used to work in Best Buy, the electronics store, 15, 16 years ago. And I remember being an assistant supervisor and having the sales manager, who was a great strategist, by the way, not very sort of book, college type of trained strategist. He was just a good sort of hand in the pulse, heat of the moment, dealing with customer strategies. And, he was told top down, we need to increase our margins, right? So if he came to the team and said, hey, we need to increase our margins, we're all minimum wage employees that don't get commission. How does that mean anything to us? And I remember something brilliant. I will never forget this. He came to us and said, guys, we're going to increase our attachment rates of accessories to our big boxes. So you, and he assigned a specific person, you're going to work the printer aisle. And that was me. You're going to sit in the printer aisle, and your job is to make sure that every printer leaves with at least 2 ink cartridges. Okay, so instead of leaving with none or leaving with 1, they're going to leave with 2. And then my question was, well, how do I do that? I can't just magically get people to buy 2 ink cartridges. And well, this is the how. You're going to ask people, have you ever run out of ink in the middle of a project and you have to stop what you're doing, run to the store, get ink, and bring it back? That's why you should always buy 2 at a time. And I was like, that was just simple. And immediately we implemented that. It was a repetitive conversation. The same thing I spoke to every person buying a printer. And it wasn't 100%, but the amount of people that bought 2 ink cartridges instead of 1 was much higher. So I find that to be a more brilliant strategy than when you come in with all these graphs and all these spreadsheets and all these calculations about strategically how you can increase your margin. When you simplify it like that, I think that's the biggest insight you can draw.
Yeah, I love that approach because, like you said, he kept it simple. He gave you a clear objective: sell 2 cartridges for each printer, and then he allowed you to use your selling skills to make that happen. But if he would have said, if he wouldn't have put the 2 out there, then in your mind that wouldn't have been something that you were trying to achieve. And again, that's why I think it's so important. I love that example, Hector, because it really points out that you got to have both the what and the how. Some people just go into work and say, well, here's our strategy. But to your point, if you don't have a goal and an objective, the 2 cartridges, then you're kind of just, shooting all over the place. It's that shotgun approach. So if you can answer the what and the how, like you said, I think that's a great example.
And to piggyback on that, you said the goal and the objective as if they're 2 different things. Are goals and objectives 2 different things? And how do you use that in order to execute on a strategy?
Yep. So typically goals and objectives would be separate. And again, the reason I use those 4 terms, goals, objectives, strategies, tactics, those are the 4 oldest planning terms. And they actually come even before business from the military arena. So you go back 2,500 years ago to Sun Tzu, the Chinese general and philosopher, and some of the military strategists back then. Those were the 4 terms that really drove what they did. And so to me, I like those because they're the most foundational and they're the easiest to think through. So to your point with goals and objectives, the goal is general. So what happens is, let's say the goal might be to grow our accounting business this year. Okay, so we want to grow our business. Now we could then have a couple different objectives under that growth. So it might be to increase the number of large accounts. It might be, from 3 to 5. It might be to increase revenue per current client by 20%. So I think the reason it's helpful to have goals and objectives separate is you can have an overarching goal, which can mean different things to different people. And then you can have objectives which are specific to different people within the group. So to use your Best Buy example, he could say, look, we need to increase, margin, or we're going to attach, our accessories to big boxes. Now for you, Hector, the objective then was to sell 2 cartridges per printer. Now, if let's say Lisa, who worked in the TV aisle, her objective then was going to be different. It was going to be maybe to sell 1 sound bar or 2 Sonos speakers for every television that she sold. So each of you had a goal that was similar, but then the objectives you were able to specify for each person.
That's crystal clear. I love that. Now, I'd like to make the transition to talk about your book, which is what got me really excited. I started reading it to my son, and he was really excited about the first couple of pages, but then afterwards, I think he realized I was teaching him business. He's like, the story is okay. But I read the whole book. Is called Strategy Man and the Anti-Strategy Squad. And it is a superhero type novel that I think summarizes a lot of your work and a lot of things that we talked about, using examples of what it feels like to be inside of office in a small team. This is mostly managers or folks, head of departments and stuff like that are trying to piece together all the different pieces of information they get from upper management, and they run into roadblocks, just like we all do. Even solopreneurs, we can run into the roadblock where we have an idea, we have an objective, we have a goal, and then when we're trying to figure out how to incrementally get to that goal by hitting objectives, we use the wrong objectives, or we measure them the wrong way, and we run into issues. So in that segue, I like to comment something. I literally just got a paper catalog from Amazon,
Wow.
from Amazon. Think about this. And it just blew my mind, because I try to think things in this way. Amazon, who's maybe the culprit of taking Sears down, and Sears, who was the inventor of the paper,
Right.
of the paper catalog, all of a sudden you're seeing just two things that just don't make any sense. Sears and Amazon are not different companies at the end of the day when you look at them, but I think the one thing that made them different was strategy. At some point, Sears stopped thinking about selling online, or didn't even occur to them, or stopped thinking about maybe supply chain management and forcing the vendors to decrease the cost, reducing friction on the process of sales. Sears still force you to physically go to a mall to buy most of the stuff, and the website was very clunky to buy online. So Amazon and Sears, obviously two different stories, right? Sears doesn't exist anymore. Amazon is the big behemoth that is now, and just that paper, that printed catalog was just mind blowing for me. Like Amazon, that would be the last thing I would imagine Amazon do. And so to talk about the experience of that, we had that catalog that has no prices. So there's a distinction between what Sears used to do and this one. This has no prices, just queue numbers, and it was just toys geared towards Christmas shopping. So my wife said, let me try this. And they sat down with all four of my kids and said, okay, go through this and circle 4 or 5 things that you like, so we know what Santa wants to bring you. And within 5 minutes or 10 minutes, she knew what everybody wanted for Christmas. So I just, the whole thing is brilliant. And also when you think about strategy, how does Amazon do this? I mean, that was just amazing for me. So what are your thoughts about that? That was just that specific thing that Sears, Amazon, and the paper catalog.
Well, it's funny. It reminds me, Hector, of a quote from Jeff Bezos, who's the CEO of Amazon, obviously, and he said, I frequently get the question, what's going to change in the next 10 years? And then he said, I rarely get the question, what's not going to change in the next 10 years? And he said, the second question is the more important of the two, because you can build a business strategy around the things that are stable in time. And he said for Amazon, that's selection, low prices, and fast delivery. He said those 3 things in the next 10 years, people are not going to not want those anymore. People are always going to want low prices, good selection, and speedy delivery or convenience. And so I think that's a great, and I love that example that you brought up with Amazon, Hector, because I think we all need to think about in our business, what are those 2 or 3 things that over the next 10 years, our clients are definitely going to want from us? And I think if we build our business strategy around those things, then to your point, and Amazon can come out with a catalog, because what is that going to do? It's going to be more convenient, right? You sat down with your wife, and in 15, 20 minutes, you had basically the entire Christmas list from your kids lined up, because Amazon made that convenient for you to do it. And again, to your point, it's brilliant because it's not what we would expect from Amazon, a paper catalog, but it fit their strategy because it was convenient. It showed the selection. And then when you go online to buy, they've got pretty good low prices. So it really does fit their model of strategy. And again, I think we as solopreneurs or small business owners, we need to think about what are those 1, 2, or 3 things that really are going to be stable over time that our customers are going to want, and then how do we deliver it?
Yeah, that's great. I'll thank you for your insight on that. So let's talk about your book and how you explain strategy through your book. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to sort of tell a story through the villains of the book. And now the book itself has some good guys, including yourself. You're sort of the guy in the lab that the superheroes go back and say, hey, this is my issue. How should I start thinking about this? So you're sort of like their guide or their Obi-Wan Kenobi or their Yoda, right? helping the good guys kind of think through how they're going to fix the problems. But the bad guys are really cool because they are, in many ways, a quasi-Dilbert cartoon, right? Because they're really just making fun of just the crazy things that happen in an office, in a business environment. And you don't when you're living them, you know they're ridiculous, but you don't say it because you can't, or the environment doesn't allow you to say it. But when you see them in a cartoon, in a graphic model, you're like, you're right, this is absolutely ridiculous. So some of these villains represent the things that stop companies from executing a strategy, and most of the things are themselves, like sort of the own business owners, their own managers are their own barriers to success. So one of the bad guys here is called the Jargon Goblin, and he has sort of a partner or another bad guy called Ignormous. So can you tell me about the Jargon Goblin and Ignormous?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jargon Goblin really takes that challenge of combining different business terms and kind of mishmashing them together. You know, I see probably a couple hundred different plans a year from marketing and accounting and finance teams. And what I see is we confuse or we mix up a lot of terms. So instead of goals, objectives, strategies, tactics, we might have strategic objectives or strategic imperatives or tactical goals. And so what happens is we've got kind of this strategy soup where we've got all these different things mixed together. And what that does is, Hector, is it causes confusion and inefficiency because now nobody's talking the same language within a department, within the company. So it takes a lot longer to actually get to, what is really going to be our strategy if people are using lots of different terms. So Jargon Goblin really kind of embodies that idea that, we've got too many different terms for things. We've got to be simple and consistent in the terms that we use. And then Ignormous is really just that lack of understanding of what is strategy. A lot of times we'll see strategies to be number one in our market or to grow our business. And those aren't even strategies to begin with. I mean, those are goals. So I think a lot of things come down to, do we understand what strategy is? And, a great exercise for your listeners out there is to sit down with their team members, their 3, 4, 5 people, and give them a note card, 3x5 note card. And then ask them, write down your definition of strategy. And then on the back of the note card, write down what our strategy is as a company. And then collect them and then read them out loud and see how many are similar and how many are different. If they're all different, then you've got some work to do to get everybody on that same page.
And similar to that exercise, I go to a lot of a conference where accountants go to, and the thing about where the accounting profession is trying to move to is trying to move away from compliance and doing tax returns and focusing on the stuff that really doesn't matter too much for the client. Most of the times they do it because they have to, because regulation determines that they do. So they try to push us into advisory. Accountants should be good advisors, just like any business professional should be a good advisor, period. But specifically, accountants are the ones that, just sort of in an office in a corner somewhere crunching numbers and don't want to give their clients advice, either because they don't know how to or they're just afraid of taking responsibility over their opinions and stuff. And one of the things that they make us do is for us to define what advisory is, right? So you would get a group of 50 accountants and ask them, hey, what does advisory mean? And you get 100 different answers. So even within a specific a group of people within the same profession, which you assume it would be clear, even it's not clear. So I think a lot of transformation is linguistic, and it starts with using the right language and language that everyone can communicate. And I think it's not just for dealing with employees, because you alluded to how we deal with employees, but when we talk to customers, the specific words that we use, how we communicate matters also, correct? We could also confuse the customer, can we?
Yeah, we can absolutely confuse the customer. It brings up a great point, Hector. One of the things to ask yourself is, do we understand what our customers' goals are and what their strategies are? Because to your point, if we're going to be a good advisor, how can we do that if we don't know what they're trying to achieve and how they're trying to achieve it? So, good advisory, I really think, goes back to those two questions. What are you trying to achieve and how are you going to do it? Once you start to uncover that, then you can get into some of the challenges, the issues, the problems they have, and then you can insert the value that you bring, as an accountant to that customer. So I love that point, Hector. I do think, like you said, if we're going to be an advisor, we've got to be able to clarify not only for our team, but for the customers what those terms mean as well.
Another villain from your book, his name is Dr. Yes. And that's my favorite just name in general, because my friends and family call me Dr. No. I say no more often than I say yes, but that's, strategically speaking, it's part of it's part of my MO. That's I think that as business owners, sometimes we want to say yes to every customer, just like saying yes to every family member or a friend, and that is a bad strategy. So why is Dr. Yes a villain, and what is Dr. Yes trying to do to destroy strategy in companies?
Yeah, and I love the examples that you shared there. So, when we created these villains, what I did is I did about 3 years of research to identify what are those top challenges that managers face. And one of the challenges that came out was too many priorities. And so Dr. Yes really embodies the idea of when you have too many priorities, when you say yes to everything, then you don't really have any priorities. You just have a giant laundry list of to-do items, and that's not a strategy. As you know, Hector, strategy is as much about what we choose not to do as it is about what we choose to do. So we have to be really disciplined, especially small business owners, because you have limited time, limited resources. How you use your time and resources each week is really going to determine your level of success. I love Warren Buffett, the billionaire investor and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. He has a great quote. He said, "The difference between successful people and very successful people is that very successful people say no to almost everything." So I think he supports exactly what your philosophy is, Hector. And you got to say no more often than yes if you're going to really focus in the areas where you can bring the most value, whether it's to your business, to your family, to your friends. If you're trying to do too much of everything, you spread yourself too thin, then you're not bringing value really to anybody at that point.
And then, thank you for that. Then there's also another villain who basically foments repeating what your competitor does, or just mimicking your competitor. Tell us about that villain.
Yeah, so the same is really about where is that differentiation that we have from the competition. And I think too often, we get caught up in kind of this competitive convergence where we're doing the same things in the same ways as everybody else. And when you look at a lot of the companies that have failed over the years, you talk about Best Buy, you used to work for Best Buy. Well, obviously one of the big competitors for many years was Circuit City. And Circuit City, going back to 2001, they were named one of the top 11 companies in the world by Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great. But they started doing a lot of the same things that Best Buy did. But then Best Buy started to differentiate by coming up with things like the Geek Squad and some other areas online that differentiated them. So Circuit City started to fail because they didn't have that differentiation or that uniqueness. The same can be said for Blockbuster Video. They were very similar to Hollywood Video and some of the others. Then Netflix came in. Netflix was different. They had an online offering. It was more convenient for people. So again, Blockbuster failed to differentiate once Netflix came out. So, it's a great point for everybody out there. Just because we do accounting doesn't mean that we can't add some unique ways to do it. Maybe it's through the relationships that we develop. Maybe it's through the service that we're able to offer. Maybe we differentiate through the education that we give our customers. So we've got to find some ways to differentiate what we do. Enterprise is a great example for accountants because Enterprise does the same thing as Hertz and Avis. They rent cars. But they found some slightly different ways to do that. They locate mostly in communities instead of airports. They keep their customer service in-house instead of outsourcing it. And, the commercials tell us instead of you having to go to the car rental agency, they'll come and pick you up. So they do the same thing as the other rental agencies, but they found slightly different ways to do it. And that's what I challenge all of us out there to think about is how do we do accounting slightly differently that our customers would value more than the competition?
That's great. And another villain here from your book is the meeting menace. But there's a couple that are sort of similar, but you have the meeting menace and you have the fire driller. Can you tell us about those two?
Yeah, so the meeting menace is really because in most organizations, I think the percentage is about 80% of managers, executives feel that their meetings are not productive and not efficient. And it's amazing, we think about how much time we spend in meetings or maybe on teleconferences. All of that time should be much more productive. So, the meeting menace kind of, it embodies that idea of we're not being effective with meetings. So for those folks out there, I'd give you 3 things which are listed in the book to run a better meeting. Number 1, give people the intent. What's the purpose of this meeting? Put it in an agenda, put it in an email, but let people know what the topic is and why you're covering it. Number 2, decisions. What are you going to decide to do in this meeting? If it's just informational, maybe you can just do an email and you don't even need to do a meeting. And then the third one is the word you brought up earlier, Hector, insights. What are the takeaways or learnings we had from that meeting? Every meeting, whether it's with your internal people or with the client, you should sum up what were your insights, what were your learnings from that meeting. And then the fire driller is just really about the fact that a lot of us are in fire drills day in and day out, meaning we're spending a lot of time and energy on stuff that's urgent, but it's not important. So we get distracted from the real important work and we're doing busy work, even though that's not really going to help us meet our goals and strategies.
And also, you have another. They're just funny. Your villains are funny. You have one called Decision Demon and the Multitaskinators. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah. So Decision Demon really represents the fact that as business owners, we make a lot of decisions by our gut instinct. And sometimes our gut is right, and that's fine. But Decision Demon shows that, there's some things that can kind of trick us or force us into making decisions that might not be as good. So what we want to really do from a decision-making standpoint, number 1, the biggest thing we can do is get other people's perspective. I think a lot of times as a solopreneur or small business owner, we feel like we've got to make all decisions by ourselves. But find people that you can bounce ideas off of, bounce decisions off of, so you can get different perspectives. You'll still make the decision, but get people's other ideas as well. And then the multitaskinators are really, in the book, these little robots basically that crawl up on your shoulder and they whisper things in your ear. Check your phone, check your email, go do this, go do that. So we're doing lots of different stuff. And the research is unequivocal in that if you multitask on a regular basis, you're 30 to 40% less productive than people that don't multitask. So we can think that we're doing more by multitasking, but the really efficient, effective managers and accountants out there are the ones that lock in on a task or a project for an hour, 2 hours, knock it out, and then go to something else without getting interrupted every 5 minutes by email or our mobile phone.
Yeah, in our world, in the accounting world, we have an issue which we like to call the client switching cost, which is all the momentum that we lose from switching from client to client, right? So if you were doing a week's worth of accounting per client, maybe you spend half an hour with each client. It'll take you maybe 10 minutes to just, okay, let's remember the last time I did. Let me read my notes. Let me check what this client's situation is so I can start working on it again. So sometimes instead of doing a week's worth of work for a client, maybe you do a month worth of work, a couple of months worth of work before you switch to the next client. That way you don't have so much lag time between clients that basically require you to stop and think. Because if you want to do it right, you should stop and think before you do your work, right? I mean, isn't that the big important thing that Peter Drucker taught us, right? So, efficiency versus effectiveness.
Yep.
If we were to pick up every task and just do it mindlessly, we could probably get really good at doing it. But then if we're doing it wrong or towards the wrong direction, we'll probably have to work double to fix it, go back and do what's effective, which is do whatever the customer wanted or whatever the goal or the objective that was in mind. So I agree with you 100%. Multitasking or not completing a task at a natural stop point to go to the next task could be really detrimental. And I think part of it is just having such a big goal or something that doesn't have milestone. Something doesn't have a foreseeable milestone. It seems like such a big task that you don't see an issue with stopping it and coming back to it because you don't see anything close by in terms of a milestone or a stopping point. So I think part of the strategy is to create milestones inside of a sort of a long-term strategy. That way you have natural stopping points and you can look at them and it looks like progress, right?
Yeah, I love that's a great tip that you provided for everybody, is the idea of milestones, because that's the way you can really understand, what's our resource allocation like? Are we making progress? Are we not making progress? And I think, to your point, build those milestones into your objectives. So at 3 months, we want to be here. At 6 months, we want to be here. At 9 months, because if you build those into your objectives, then we know that we've got, we can determine whether or not the strategy is being successful.
That's great, Rich. Thank you very much for this. For folks that want to maybe read some of your books, maybe contact you or hire you for some consulting, tell us all about how people can get in contact with you, and then we'll wrap it up with a final question afterward.
Sounds good, Hector. So if everybody likes free resources, so if you want some free articles, videos, white papers, podcasts, you can go to strategyskills.com. So that's strategyskills.com. I write a monthly newsletter. That's free as well. It's just about 2 or 3 pages a month. It's on different strategy topics, so that's free also. And then, as you mentioned, the book Strategy Man and the Anti-Strategy Squad, that's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, really kind of anywhere books are sold. But those would probably be the 2 main things I'd share with you.
Absolutely. And some of the things I already started doing with my team, and this would be sort of suggestion to anybody listening or watching, is you can actually just describe one of the villains in a team meeting. Just describe him. Say, hey, this villain from this book, the Jargon Goblin or the Franken strategy or the Psylocke clubs or whatever. Describe what the villain is and tell people to, hey, ask them, in what situations have you seen sort of that villain affecting this company? And people will tell you all the time, because when you use it as a third party, right? And it's not like, describe ways your manager messed up or describe ways a team member messed up. You're really not going to get a whole bunch of people doing it just because people want to be fair with their teammates and give them the benefit of the doubt, or maybe they don't want to be an opinionated individual. But when you call it a bad guy and it's a third person, people will attack that all the time, and you will really get people talking and thinking about these things. And then I think from there, you can start thinking, okay, so how do we turn that into a good thing? We identified that to be something that shows up every once in a while. How, as a company, do we build a culture around helping each other recognize when that happens, stopping it, and then stopping to think about how we're going to do that moving forward? I mean, is that what you were thinking when you wrote this book?
It's a great point. Actually, no. And I love that insight that you just shared with me. But that's such an interesting point. Is, like you said, if you take it that it's not my manager's issue, it's this bad guy's issue. Now all of us can look at it objectively with some humor, but your point, it still really embodies something that's happening within our group. So no, I love that perspective, Hector. Thanks for sharing that.
That's cool, Rich. So, Rich, I know you're a consultant, you're an advisor, and you're giving people strategic advice all the time, and all of these concepts are probably just sort of ingrained in your head, and they're very natural for you to think about that. But when you were getting started, when you were sort of building your business around this, what is the best advice that you have received that helped you shape your professional life?
I'd like to give one other piece of advice, and that is new growth comes from new thinking. If we want to have new results in the next year, as we start planning for this new year, we've got to have new thinking that drives those new results. So give yourself and your team some new tools, maybe a new book or two, listen to Hector's podcast on a regular basis. Give yourself those new ideas, and that will help you come up with the new thinking that's going to lead your business. So I think that's really the key thing. New growth comes from new thinking. Stimulate that new thinking through books, podcasts, those types of things. Absolutely.
Thank you, Rich. And everyone, check out Rich Horwath's work is strategicskills.com. There's, as he mentioned, there's the blog, the articles, there's information about the books, tons of great information. And Rich, thank you very much for coming on. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Hector. It was great to be with you.
Likewise.